Well, thank you folks for coming. So I'm James Gummerson. So I want to say, first of all, thank you so much for coming. Obviously I really appreciate it for you guys to come and sort of support me and find out a little bit about my work. So that's greatly appreciated. As any artist, that would be appreciated. So I'm going to start off by saying tonight I'm going to structure the question stuff a little bit, maybe a little bit differently. Sometimes people leave the questions right till the end. Sometimes people question as they go. I think what we're going to do tonight is you can ask questions, but I'll do that maybe after every slide or every couple of slides. I'll say, hey, anybody have any questions? And then you guys can certainly ask questions that are relevant to the slide. I find that's the easiest way to do it. I find sometimes if we do it as we're moving, all of a sudden I lose my train of thought. And I find as I'm getting older, my train of thought starts to go pretty quick. So anyway, and then I find this awkward moment where I'm like, what was I talking about? And you guys are looking at me like, what the hell? So anyway, so we'll do that. So every couple slides I say, any questions? And you guys can certainly ask away. Okay. So I'll first start by introducing myself a little bit. For those of you who don't know me, again, my name is James Gummerson. I'm a local Hamilton artist. And I've been doing this now, I say 25 years professional career emerging. I put emerging and established artist into that. I've been doing this for a long time. Well, I've been doing this since I was a kid, to be honest with you. But as I originally started as an illustrator. I think in high school, it's funny, when I was in high school, and I told one of the guidance counselors, I said, I want to be an artist. And they were like, okay, great, that's awesome, but what do you really want to do? And so they started to guide me a little bit to the career as an illustrator. So I ended up going to Sheridan College for applied arts and technology there as an illustrator, and it's actually where I learned a lot of my skills, the basic skills anyway, as an artist. And I worked as a freelance illustrator for a long time. I actually worked for some advertising agencies in British Columbia. I ended up working for a company called Children's Spirit Publishing, where I was a children's book illustrator for a long time. Really enjoyed that. So I actually went into interpretive illustration, which is sort of a more creative, it's children's book, it's editorials and things like that. When I first started the illustration course, I actually went into technical illustration, which was exploded drawings and things like that, which was just not my bag, as you can see. So anyway, I did interpretive illustration and was illustrating children's books and things like that over the years. But in the background, I was always doing my own work, stuff that I just like to do. I had this little desk in the basement, and I would go down there on a regular basis, and I would just paint whatever I saw. Most of the time it was natural elements. If I'd go for a hike or something like that, I'd paint. And quite often people would, they'd maybe commission me to do something. And after a while, I would start putting my work in, auctions and, fundraisers and things like that. And that's kind of how I started, ended up doing more work as an artist, a visual artist. Eventually, and I'd say probably over about a 10-year span, I ended up sort of transitioning my illustration career to my visual arts career, and really sort of put down my T-square and my set square and that kind of stuff. And illustration is fantastic. It's a fantastic career for somebody else. And because it is a really demanding career. And I loved it for a while, but you're up a lot, you're up late at night. And it's funny, in the illustration course, they actually sort of prepare you for that. They make you stay up all night on a regular basis doing work. And so for me, that just got really grueling. So anyway, I love doing my visual work, and I started to transition that way. My current career basically includes a few things. Obviously, one of the main sources of income is from having my work in galleries. I put them in a few galleries, and I try to limit the amount. I add this here because I think it's important, well, at least it's important for me anyway, to make sure that whatever gallery I'm in, that I can produce for them. I can give them work on a regular basis, especially if the work sells. I have new work to give them, so they're not sort of waiting around. And I think that's important. So anyway, I just put that in there. Most of my work is local subject matter. Not always. And over the years, it's changed and morphed a little bit. Sometimes it's flowers. I've done a whole series on Coots Paradise. I did a show on city gardens, so gardens in the city. But most of it is the world around me, and that's what I like to paint. So, and I find because of that, because I love the world around me, it actually comes out of my paintings. I also teach too, as well, as some of you may know. I see some people in here, some familiar faces from classes and stuff like that. So I teach here at the DVSA. I teach at Mohawk. I do various sort of workshops in different places throughout Ontario, and so that's it's a great way to create funds too, as well, and just to actually meet new people. That's a great thing to do. I jury shows too. So most recently, I did the Color and Form Society. I juried their show, and it turns out you can actually make money doing that. And so I do that actually on the side as well whenever I get a chance to do that. And it turns out as well, every once in a while, an artist can land on TV as well. I put this in here because I did end up on Landscape Artist of the Year Canada. Did anybody see the show? Okay. So there's only so the British version of this show is very, very popular. It's Survivor popular in Britain, right? And they didn't, and in Canada, they wanted to try it out. And it's funny, they did it just before COVID, right? Literally the year before COVID, that summer or fall before COVID. And it was a trial, so they only did 4 episodes. So it was a great thing. They wanted to see if it worked out. But what happened was COVID hit. Nothing actually happened after COVID, right? And so that kind of stopped. There has been talk about them coming out with another season, so hopefully that happens. I'd love to go back on there too as well. It was a fun experience. I ended up meeting these guys, Suki and Lee, Mark Mayer, Joanne Todd, who's a fantastic artist. Mark Mayer being the director of the National Gallery. Everybody knows Suki and Lee from CBC. This guy, I can't remember his name. He's from the Michael Gallery. Everybody remember his name? I don't know. Anyway, so that's me. So how it works was they invited people onto the show. There was usually 8 contestants per episode, and they also invited 25 wildcard artists on per show. And so out of the 25 wildcard artists, they would wander around and they would pick one of those wildcard artists to go on to the next, to the end. So I ended up being the season 1 winner of the wildcard, and I went on to the end. And it was fun. It was a fun experience because when I first got there, we have all the 25 wildcard artists, and it's funny when you don't know how it works until you actually get onto one of these shows, and a lot of it is as scripted as you can imagine, because they tell everybody, okay, stand behind the house, and then we'll tell you when to come. And so don't look at the camera. And as soon as I come around the house, I look right at the camera. Anyway, and you walk out too, and they get the whole the whole slow motion thing. Walk around the house. These amazing artists. So anyway, I went on that. So we go out into this thing, and they say, okay, it was just a field. It was a farm field with some fences, and she said, okay, you guys can all draw this. And it was literally just a couple of farm fields. There was I think a tree over here, and there was a little barn in the distance. And I thought, how am I gonna paint this? And a lot of people did sort of this Rothko kind of thing. And painted the fields. And it's funny because at the time I was doing paintings of gardens in the city. I was doing a whole show on that at Earl's Court, and I was working on that painting. And I kind of turned to my side, and there was a house there, which you see right there. and everybody was sort of facing that way. And this house was right here, and there was a beautiful garden in front of the house. And I said to the director, I said, can I just paint the garden? She goes, yeah, go ahead. So everybody painted that way. So everybody's paintings were like just like this flat field. It was kind of unfair. And I ran over here and I painted this beautiful garden. And, and Joe and Todd said it was, Monet would be proud and that kind of stuff. And it's like, yeah, for sure. Anyway, I ended up winning that. I didn't win, obviously, the whole thing, but I got to the end. It was kind of cool. It was kind of fun. So that's that little experience. Maybe someday it'll happen again. So like I said, I've been in Hamilton for quite a few years. And my first sort of step into the Hamilton art scene was the Tiger Group. Does anybody know what the Tiger Group is? Okay, so Tiger Group was, everybody recognize that name, Conrad Fury? Okay. So yeah, Conrad Fury, Rick Cook, Bill Powell. There was a few of them actually that sort of formed this group, the Tiger Group. They were really big during that time. And I think they even formed the Festival of Friends in Hamilton. That's what, yeah. So anyway, I got to know these guys. I ended up actually going to, these guys actually had this gallery on Barton Street, okay? Now, it was in the middle of Barton Street, okay? It was an interesting place. It was right down halfway between West and East on Barton. And so anyway, this gallery, I wanted to get into this gallery. And they said, okay, yeah, we really want you to come in, but we want you to get sort of looked at by another artist in town. His name is Bill Powell, right? So you're going to go down to Barton Street, and I went down there at night, okay, halfway through Barton Street there, and met Bill Powell. And Bill was a pretty interesting guy, and Conrad was there, Rick Cook, all those guys were there, and they were sort of critiquing my work. And so this is my first sort of foray into Hamilton. And so Bill kind of looked and asked me a couple of questions. And then he says to me, he says, Jim, he looks at me and he says, you're blocked. You're completely blocked. And so he went up one side of me and down the other. And so I went home hanging my head. I was like, I'm blocked. Okay, I suck as an artist. But it's funny, Bill called me up the next day and he says, I'm sorry, I don't know why I did that, blah, blah, come back in. So anyway, I came back in. I hung with those guys for a little while, actually, and it was just a fun sort of way to kind of get involved in the Hamilton art community. They knew a lot of people, knew a lot of the gallery owners and stuff like that, so made a lot of connections through those guys. I put Robert E. Ross on there. Everybody knows who Robert Ross is. So when I first got to Hamilton, again, I didn't know how to get into the industry here, the art industry in Hamilton. I'd already been showing my work sort of abroad, but not in Hamilton itself. And so I ended up calling Robert Ross. I thought, who's the big artist in town? I ended up calling him and I said, Robert, how do I do this in Hamilton? So this is probably going back about 18-ish years ago. And he agreed to meet with me. So we ended up meeting at a cafeteria at the hospital. He probably wanted to be in a place where there's a lot of people. He had no idea who I was. So anyway, so we met, and he told me a lot of different stuff. He told me about some of the galleries in town, some of the connections I could make. And so he was a really big help in sort of starting me in Hamilton. And so I ended up, through that connection, I ended up going to the McNaught Gallery. And I don't know if the McNaught, does anybody know the McNaught Gallery, the Arctic Experience, they call it? It was on James Street. So I don't know if they're still around. So they were a big gallery in town for a very long time. Janet and Marvin ran that gallery, and I was with them for quite a few years. And I made a lot of artistic connections that way. Made a lot of collectors through that. And then over time, I ended up moving to the Focus Gallery, which was a gallery on James Street as well. Mark Strutt, does anybody know Mark Strutt, the name Mark Strutt? Yeah, so Mark was, he's a pretty well-known artist in this area. And Mark had that gallery there for a few years and took me in. And it's actually where I had my first one-man show in Hamilton. at the Focus Gallery. So that was really good too as well. And then I had more work at the AGH, eventually, and as well having my work at Earl's Court Gallery. I'm sure everybody knows Earl's Court Gallery here in Hamilton. One of my favorite galleries so far in Hamilton. And so, yeah, that's how I kind of went through the Hamilton. That's me kind of in a nutshell from an introduction standpoint. Any questions on that so far? Yeah, go ahead.
So when you put your art in different galleries, how much would they take as far as like the percentage that they would take of your artwork? And did you find that you were able to sell more through a gallery than you would in your own website?
Yeah, that's a good question. I get that the question all the time. So I'll tell you right now, galleries take anywhere from 40 to 50%. Okay. And that's just kind of the way it is. That's pretty standard across the board. Even if you're a big artist, you're Greg Hardy, you still 40, 50% is where it lies on a gallery standpoint. I see my relationship with the gallery as sort of a partnership, right? They're out there as long as they're out there and you're in the right gallery. They've got good connections. They make good collector connections, and they're out there supporting you and promoting your work. That's a good relationship because you're keeping them in business and they're keeping you in business, and it's a nice symbiotic relationship. And so that's important. I think also to your question, I think to most artists, or to a lot of artists anyway, at least to me, it's been a very important part of my career. I know that typically if an artist is in a gallery, it does tend to kind of raise your level of, how people see your work. If it's in a gallery, then you must be a little more important especially in collectors' eyes. Not always, but that tends to be sort of a view for most people. And so now I also sell stuff out of my home, out of my studio, and I think that's another important part of what I do, but not nearly as much as I do in galleries. It's always nice when people contact me and say, "Hey, I saw your painting on your website," and they come to the studio. The nice part about that, it's all your money, right? So that when that happens, it's fantastic. But like I said, through the galleries, I sell way more work through the galleries. Yeah, and also social media is also a great way to kind of get your name out there too and sell work. I've sold a lot of work through that too as well. Does that answer the question? Yeah, perfect. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
When you're with a certain gallery, do you have to stay with them, or can you go to another one at the same time?
Well, so that's a big question. It depends on the gallery. So a lot of galleries, and this seems to be more and more I see over the years, exclusivity with a gallery is what a lot of galleries want. But what I see the exclusivity around is the region, right? So if you're in a specific gallery, you can only sell work in Hamilton, or you can only sell, just like I'm in a gallery in Oakville, I can only sell work in Mississauga and Oakville there. So, yeah. But the way I see it is, as long as they're selling your work, they're promoting you, and the work's going through, I don't mind being exclusive to a gallery in a certain particular area. Yeah. Any other questions? Cool.
They kind of hold you in an area. So say you were up north in Halliburton.
Yeah.
Would they frown on you going into a gallery that far away?
Nope. Yeah, I mean, really can't. I mean, if a gallery is saying, wait, as long as you stay within any customers or anybody that sorry, not any customers, but any galleries in Oakville, for example, you can't go into. You can only show your work there. Outside of that, it's fair game. It's yours, yeah. And I think that's the way it should be, right? Like I said, I don't mind the exclusivity part of it. And I understand it too as well from a business standpoint. I know why gallery owners do that. But as long as that gallery is really working for you, they've got a good collector list and they're selling your work, I'm good with that. Yeah, go ahead.
So, one more question.
Yeah.
How long do you leave your paintings? Would you leave it there 6 months? If they sell, do you pull it back? Or do they keep it?
So and it really depends. I think if you put a few paintings, and if you only put one painting and it doesn't sell over the year, you might want to start thinking about either changing that painting out, or think about, if they're even worth selling your work in. But usually if you put 5 paintings in and 4 of those paintings sell over the year and one's still there. I've had paintings, for example, at Earl's Court, I've had a couple of paintings there for almost a year and a half, which is fine. Sometimes some paintings take a long time to sell. I've had paintings before sit there for like 3 years. And it's funny, I walk in the gallery and, and Andrea will be like, hey, that painting sold. I'll be like, what painting? She'll be like, that one that was there for like 3 years. Somebody just came in and bought it. So that happens. Sometimes some paintings are just that way. They just take a little longer to sell. So hopefully that answers the question. Yeah, okay.
And when you were in the galleries, like the Arctic Gallery, I can't remember the actual
Yeah.
and in the Focus Gallery,
Not.
how did that dynamic get created, that relationship? Did you approach them?
Yeah.
You did?
Yeah,
You
I approached them,
Did you
yeah.
email or you walked in the door?
Walked in the door and met the gallery. That's an important part of it. Like things are changing a little bit, obviously, with social media and that kind of stuff. Sometimes galleries will approach you right through social media. That's happened to me a couple of times. But if you see a gallery that you really want to get into, it's always important to kind of try to get in there. Sometimes you can make an email first and say, hey, are you around? I was kind of interested. The other important part about that, though, is if you go on a website of gallery, usually it says their submission, it has their submission guidelines, and they have very specific guidelines around submissions and how they want you to do that. So I would always read that first before you approach a gallery. But that said, I mean, there's nothing wrong with breaking the rules a little bit. I mean, if I had listened to every little, done things right by the book all the time, I might not have gotten into any gallery. Sometimes you have to, kind of sort of show up sometimes and say, hey, are you interested? Maybe they're not interested now. Maybe they'll be interested later. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, cool. So this is my studio. And if you don't like clutter and mess, please turn away. It is an absolute disaster. And it really is. I call it organized chaos. Okay? It does have some organization to it, I promise you. And as you can see, like there's paint all over the wall, over the windowsill. Usually I paint fairly thickly, so sometimes the paint comes up right on top of the canvas. But everything sort of has its place. I know where the paint is. I know where the brushes are and all that kind of stuff. I know where my color wheel is always sitting right there for me, and maybe my jars of fix-it-is and all that kind of stuff. So the way I see it, and it's kind of funny, I don't know if, are other artists out there like this. When I see how messy my studio is, I think, okay, I got to clean that up. But then I'm not done this painting, and I think, okay, this is much more. I'd love to just finish the painting. So that's what I do. And so I never actually get to the studio. So maybe once every year or once every year and a half, I'll kind of get in there and kind of do a full clean. And then fairly quickly it gets back to where it was. Go ahead.
What kind of lighting do you use in your studio?
So for two things I use is obviously natural light. I have big bay windows in my studio. Nice white natural light is really, really important. And I also use a white light, big white sort of strobe, kind of like this, but very white light. And if you use any other kind of blue lights or yellow lights, obviously they mess up your color a little bit. And also important not to make it too bright, because that also hazes your colors a little bit. So just a nice normal white light.
So north facing?
North facing light is, 100% the best way to go. And so, that studio, that light right now is a north-facing light. Comes in, you get this nice white light come in instead of sunlight, right, where you get this yellow light that's going to change your colors and that kind of stuff. The other thing you'll notice, too, on my studio here is I've got a couple of paintings sort of, eased. They're kind of surrounding each other. And the reason for that is it's kind of my process. So I'll finish a painting, and I'll put it up here, and then I'll finish another one, and I'll put it up here. And then the one that I'm working on, I use, especially if you're working in a sort of a series, I'll use the reason I'll put these two up here is so that when I'm painting this one, I'm looking at these two, and I'm trying to make it consistent, right? I'm trying to, especially if you're working on a series, I'm thinking of it as an entire thought process, right? And one big entire thought. So each painting sort of informs the next one. And so I find that a really good way to sort of do it, so that each one's sort of informing. And you're always looking at it and going, okay, yeah, that's what I did on that last one. So does that make any sense? I have a home studio. I have a studio up at our cottage too as well. I love painting up there. I do paint on plein air whenever I can. I was having a conversation with somebody just earlier about this. Whenever you get a chance, going outside to paint is a fantastic thing to do. Most of my work is done through a series of photographs, references, and things like that. But anytime I can actually get out in the field and paint outside is far more superior than just working from a photograph. And the reason is, I was saying that to somebody or two, is that you can take 400 photographs of the same object or same scene, and depending on the type of camera and the aperture and the lighting and all that kind of stuff, the color lens, you can have 400 different photographs, right? And so photographs can lie a little bit. So anytime you can get actually out there and see the actual colors and see the values and those kinds of things is really, really important. So, and that's kind of why I like to get out every once in a while and try to do stuff from right outside. And then I take the work back into the studio and kind of dice it up a little bit that way. Any questions on that? Okay. I was going to make one other little note. This is how my paint is really thick, and it ends up coming up into these little sculptures that my kids like to kind of try and take away and turn into little people. But anyway, it gets really thick and kind of builds up. So I'll start. I'm going to introduce a couple of paintings. I'll walk through a few of the paintings that I've done, and then I'll kind of go into sort of the methodologies of it. This painting was inspired by a walk right on one evening. So this was a few years ago anyway. I was walking home after doing a commission work for somebody. I was taking photographs for a commission painting. And it was sort of the first really warm spring night out. And that first warm spring, it's been cold. And it just, even if it's like maybe 15, 16 degrees, it just feels even warmer. And it was a beautiful night. I was walking home, and some of the flowers were out. They're coming out too as well. And I was so inspired by that night, that walk home. I was taking photographs of everything. And this is kind of one of the things that I saw when I was coming home that night. And so that's what kind of was inspired. The sun was going down. The sun was coming through the trees. And I was actually looking down an alley down near Kent Street in the Kirkendall neighborhood. So I did a whole series, actually, paintings of just that night of walking home. And so for me, painting, anything I paint, and as probably for a lot of artists, but it's something that I love. On a moment that maybe I experienced that really touched me, for example, I try to paint about it. And so I also I suffered a lot on this composition. And the reason is because when I started this composition, the composition actually was a square piece like this. And I felt like it was just too, I felt like there was just too much going on in the center because it was squared off. So I ended up making it longer, and then I stressed out about it forever that it was imbalanced, like there wasn't enough space on the right-hand side, and there was too much pull on the left. Anyway, so I suffered greatly for the composition. I think it turned out okay in the end. So this is a painting. So after I'd done it, I completed a whole series of paintings on Coote's Paradise. I had a show at the Focus Gallery on that. But after that, I ended up doing paintings of gardens in the neighborhoods, and this is kind of one of the first attempts at that. When I was doing my Coote series, I was using paint so thick. I was spending a fortune in paint too as well. And so if you look at the paints, you can actually sort of see the texture on it. It's super, super thick. And this is kind of an experimentation into that. So when I was doing that Coots series, it's funny. I find that, oh, sorry, go ahead. Yes, you have a question. What's that?
That's the painting we have.
You guys have that painting?
That's our sport.
That's amazing.
Yes.
That's awesome. That touched me. Thank you so much. That's really nice. Maybe I'll just move on that because I don't want to talk about it. Well, so I'll tell you, I'd finished a whole series on Coots Paradise, and I'll show you some of those paintings. Those paintings way back then were much more desaturated in color. They were muted in values and tones. And that was purposeful. I wanted to try and create a moody sort of feeling in my work. And my values and my colors were really low and muted. And so this painting, I don't know if you can sort of see it here. I guess you can in that painting, in that image. But the colors aren't as vibrant, as bright as you might see them in real life. I was kind of trying to mute the colors and tones down a little bit. But the effect, I think, was fantastic for me anyway. I have some inspirations for this painting. What ended up happening is I'd finished the Coots Paradise series. And right at the end of the series, I was walking by a house and I saw this, it was spring and the flowers are out. And it took me right back by this giant tree sort of overcoming everything, even overtaking the house. So I wanted to kind of close in the composition a little bit, make you feel like this tree is overtaking everything, right? So that was sort of the concept of it. And it was the last painting in that series. And it's funny, I find that that happens a lot, is usually the last painting or a painting near the end of a series kind of spurs on your next sort of series of work. And so this actually painting started my whole sort of city garden series that I had created after that, a show that I had at Earl's Court. Some inspiration for you guys, so you know, a little more history on the painting. So there's an artist I love who's Matt Bain. Does anybody know the name Matt Bain? He's a very well-known contemporary Toronto artist right now. Some of his work's actually held in the collection at the AGH. This painting of his is called Elliot's April. It's really inspired by Matt Bain's work. But it's a really muted sort of tone value of flowers. And I've always loved this painting. And then there was another photo I took years and years and years ago, and I've had this photo sitting in my studio, just sort of lying around, and there's a whole bunch of those photographs sort of lying around. And I've always wanted to do something with it. I've never done anything with it from a painting standpoint. But I've always had this pictures sort of lying around. I just thought I think what I really liked was sort of the muted sort of colors and tones of the sort of the dead flowers and stuff that's on the tree. I was really inspired by it. So those two thoughts sort of came together, and that's what actually was sort of driving the color scheme for this painting. It was always in the back of my mind, and so it just as I was doing it, that's kind of what drove that color scheme for it. Any questions on that?
How true to your photograph is?
So that's interesting. We were talking about that with somebody else too as well. So I take a ton of photographs, and I'll crop and add and remove stuff. I'd say it is true to some sense in maybe in sort of the subject that's there. But I use the photographs as only sort of a reference point. And the reference point is maybe the subject matter itself and where things are placed, for example. But then I put myself into it. Like I was saying, these two inspirations, that photograph and this one here, I'm thinking about those things while I'm painting. And so when I'm using my colors, I'm literally thinking, okay, how can I desaturate it and have the same value and color? It's actually really hard to see, but it's a really good painting because there's a lot of different values there, a lot of different tonal values in those pinks. And in here, a lot of I was really fascinated by the pinks and the blues in that sort of those dead flowers. And I always wanted to do something with it. And so I kind of added that part of it to myself. So this is, I mean, as far as subject matter is really close, but the coloring is completely different. Does that make sense? Yeah. And again, I'm showing you some of this stuff because for those who never seen my work, again, as time went on, I ended up moving a lot of my work to more urban scenes, as you can see, the stuff that I'm doing here. Some of you may have noticed that from the live auction that we had last year, Maine West, that was in the auction. And I ended up walking, so I spent a lot of time walking at night, in the evenings, and taking photographs. And this one is from the Lock and Starbucks. I just loved that scene of all of that light that's coming down on the sidewalk. I love dramatic light. For me, dramatic light is everything. I find it's interesting because this painting, the light isn't as dramatic in the sense that you don't have huge shadow and huge sunlight. And I found with that Coote series, I didn't have that. And it was for a reason. I was trying to create sort of this moodiness to it. So I wasn't really focused on dramatic lighting. But I found as I moved a little farther into sort of this urban stuff, I found sunlight and drama in the shadows. And so that's kind of what I was sort of looking at. You can sort of see the sunshine kind of just peeking through there a little bit. The sun's going down. And I'm really getting interested in, and again, you can sort of see it over here, I'm really interested in that dramatic lighting, the huge shifts in color and value between dark and light. You can also see, and I'll show you some work of the Coote stuff, but there's a lot more color going into my work in these two as well. So, and again, as I keep moving along, this is sort of, again, more colors going into my work. I'm really fascinated with sunlight. I love sunlight coming through trees, coming down the street. In this one, I love the idea of sun coming through those little willow leaves. And then over here, I have done in variety. Again, I love the moodiness of that greenish sort of light with the dark purple landscape there. I also take a walk around the city sometimes. It's on James Street. The Lighthouse Restaurant, unfortunately, actually is closing up. I just found out. So I'm glad I had a chance to. But if you ever walked by this place, it's fantastic. It adds so much character to the street. It's just like an old school market. And the reason I painted is just so many colors, and it's almost like an abstract of colors and shapes. So love doing it. I also did a whole series called The Kitchen Garden. I actually, during COVID, because we really couldn't go a lot of places, I ended up going to Dundurn Kitchen Garden. Has anybody ever been there? It's a fantastic place. It's a weird place because if you ever go to the Dundurn Kitchen Garden, it feels like you're not in the city, right? You don't feel like you're in the city anymore. You just feel like you're in this kind of like almost like cottage country a little bit. And you can see the lake. And so I love that. So I actually went there a lot and ended up doing a whole series on this a couple of years ago. And so, yeah, this is kind of the work. The work on this garden series stuff was way more saturated. The colors are much greener, yellow, really saturated colors. Yeah. And that's another work from that Kitchen Garden series. I almost saw this as sort of an abstract painting, and I'll tell you why. Okay. So when I was thinking about this series, this talk, I was trying to figure out what am I going to talk about. Inspiration, methodologies, past history, my art. So obviously I'm going to talk a little bit about all those things, but as I kind of deep dove into my past and trying to think about sort of the stuff that I've done, sort of patterns sort of emerged. What I really noticed is that one thing I've always noticed with all my work is I've always been searching for a new way, a new methodology, one little piece that I could learn to get a little bit better. And so all of my work has always been about trying a new piece, taking something from another artist that I like and kind of incorporating in that, taking another artist, incorporating that, developing the work, trying to get better and better and better. So for me, it's always been about the work, trying to get better. And so as a result, I found I ended up jumping a lot around to different styles, which is not uncommon with most artists. I know Robert Bateman, for example. Does anybody know who Robert Bateman is? Famous Canadian. I'm sure everybody does. He was an abstract artist for a long time. Most people don't know that. And so he ended up becoming a realist painter. He actually went through a lot of different stages. And that's pretty common, I think. And that's one really great way for an artist to grow, because it informs all these different sort of styles that you kind of experiment and work through. They all eventually become part of the same thing, right? So, and I think that's an important part of the process. I put this on here not because he's my buddy. I don't know Robert Bateman very well, but I ended up going to a book signing. Well, the reason I put it on there is when I was a kid, I was really super inspired by Robert Bateman. He was one of my biggest inspirations. I find he's still a big inspiration for me. I don't do wildlife painting, as you can see. But what I do find interesting about Bateman's work is he's an incredibly serious artist. He takes it very serious. But his work, I learned a lot from Bateman's compositions, which I'll show you in a little bit. And so I've always found his work to be incredible. Funny little conversation, when I met Bateman, I actually said to him, I said, Mr. Bateman, I was so excited to see him. I'm like, Mr. Bateman, I've been so inspired by your work all these years. And he's like, oh yeah, that's great. He said, what kind of wildlife do you paint? And I said, oh, I don't paint wildlife. And he kind of went like this. He kind of this kind of strange look. It's like epic fail. It's like, I just met my childhood here and I totally botched it. And then I had to explain to him, say, no, I was, your compositional methodologies and color usage, that's what's, and they kind of went, oh, okay, I get it, okay. So some of the other influences that I have, Robert Bateman, Andrew Wyeth. Does anybody know Andrew Wyeth? Does that sound familiar? Andrew Wyeth's a great American artist. Tom Thompson, I'm sure most artists are inspired by Tom Thompson and the Group of Seven. Matt Bain is a Canadian artist, and Mark Rothko is an American abstract artist. I was really inspired by. This is some of my earliest stuff. Again, this is actually the reason I put these on here is because some of these are almost 20 or more years ago. This is sort of my Tom Thompson Tom Thompson sort of phase that I went through. This is my Matt Bain series. That's my Robert Bateman thing, and there's my Andrew Wyeth watercolor process that I was going through at the time. And so I put this on here because I think Bateman, from a standpoint, a compositional standpoint, what I really learned from Bateman was actually it was interesting. My grandfather was he was a graphic artist for Ford. And he sort of introduced me to Bateman's work when I was very young. He gave me my first Bateman book. And I sort of began to understand the significance of Bateman's work as I got older. As interestingly enough, Robert Bateman was actually inspired by Andrew Wyeth. And he paints today because of Wyeth's influence, actually. I thought that was always interesting. So what I sort of learned from a few of these different artists, and I try to incorporate in my own work, and I think it's really important. I also teach this in my urban landscape class, is abstract inspiring realism. So it's funny, when Bateman eventually ended up going to Andrew Wyeth's show, he said that he was inspired by the fact that here was a very real artist doing things in a very abstract way. And so abstract art was sort of really inspiring and invoking new compositions. So I know this about Bateman. He's really interested he was very inspired by Franz Klein. And the reason I show this is because it shows Bateman was painting a fence post one day, was looking at this work, and he had this composition from Franz Klein in his mind. And when he was painting it, he had sort of an aha moment where he was like, I could use this composition as an inspiration for my realistic work. And so by doing so, you make so much more interesting compositions as opposed to just using sort of a rule of thirds in your work, or maybe putting the composition a little off center. You're actually thinking in terms almost of an abstract concept. Again, Robert Bateman, it's almost if you turn this upside down, obviously it almost looks like an abstract painting. Andrew Wyeth, again, one of my biggest inspirations. Again, if you look at this one again, if you turn it upside down, it's almost kind of mirrors itself. Well, Wyeth was looking at the big shapes and forms here, and he was looking at realism in a very, very abstract way. And that was a really, really important thing for me. It took me a while to understand it, actually, because it's a weird concept. How could abstract art inform realism? But if you look at the large shapes here, and the way that this is composed, if you squint your eyes, it just looks like a bunch of shapes, right? Big, large shapes. And he was really interested in that abstract concept. And so he used the abstract concept and turned it into a real painting, a realistic painting. Again, you can sort of see him being inspired by abstract art on the left, and then you can see his watercolor on the right. This is me, some of my early watercolor stuff. I was a big watercolor artist for a long time. I painted watercolor all the time, and you can sort of see me kind of working through that concept of abstract, with these fence posts, really trying to create really interesting compositions as opposed to just trying to come up with just a nice pretty picture, but rather arranging the objects that I see or moving my frame of reference around a little bit so I had a really interesting composition abstractly. And if you look at this as abstract inspiring, so this is one of my paintings on the right-hand side. This is from my kitchen garden series. So I would do these little I would take all of the elements, all my photographs that I took at the Dundurn kitchen garden, and I would start to put things sort of together. And what I thought would be interesting is I found this big sort of shape here. You can sort of see what I've sort of sketched there. I found that really, really interesting, and I thought, what if I because I had a bunch of pictures of hay bales, and I thought, what if I could sort of turn the hay bale and just have it come off the side like this as an interesting abstract shape. And then I had a bunch of pictures of apples too, so I put the picture, because I noticed on some of the hay bales, people would put apples as they moved around the garden. And I put some of those apples on top, and I was thinking of this as sort of an abstract concept first, and then moving it into a realistic painting. Is there any questions so far about that? Okay. And sort of the same thing here. When I was doing this, it's a realistic painting, but I used this. This is sort of my abstract kind of composition of it. Some of the things that are in this painting weren't here, like that bamboo shoot wasn't there. This funny this little thing here with the tomatoes. I actually put that in there from another part of the painting, because I wanted to create this really interesting scene. I added the cat later too as well. I thought that was interesting. Did everybody see the cat right away? No, yeah, that's funny. So I kind of wanted to, kind of put the cat in a place Bateman was really good at doing that. Bateman always was really good at doing this. He put something in plain view, but you didn't see it right away. It's right in front of your face, but you don't see it. And the reason you don't see it is because of this big red wheelbarrow attracts your attention first, right? And there's a lot of other things to attract your attention. But then when you see it, you're like, how did I not see him? He's right in plain view. So that's kind of what I was looking to get. Yeah, go ahead.
The wheelbarrow doesn't seem to be in your abstraction.
No, it wasn't. I added that actually after, because I had a whole bunch of pictures of wheelbarrows, and I thought, so I was really thinking about putting this cat here, but I was thinking in terms of, I want the cat to be there, but I don't want you to see it right away. And so I thought, if I put this cat here, but I take the red wheelbarrow and I put it there, then people are going to look at that red wheelbarrow, and they're not going to see the cat, because this red is so different from the rest of the composition. It really is a focal point. Your eye can't help but look at that first. And so as you look at that first, then you start to wander around the rest of the painting. You don't necessarily, I haven't seen many people that have seen the cat right away. So, does that make sense? Okay.
I think if you put the wheelbarrow into your abstraction, it might make your abstraction a little more interesting.
May make more sense. Yeah, no, for sure. Yes?
Do you block out different values to represent?
I do, yeah. Quite often I'll do an underpainting and create sort of so that creates like a value sketch first underneath, and then I'll paint on top of that. I think that's really important. The underpainting is really, really important because it does exactly what you say. I find that when I teach class, most people get color to some extent, but values is the hardest thing for most people to understand and to get. I've been doing it for years and I still struggle with value. It's really difficult. So doing an underpainting first helps you to and even if it's all in one color, right? Some areas are lighter, some areas are darker, right? That kind of unifies your light and says, okay, this area matches this area, and then you can change it, right? You can say, okay, actually should be a little darker, this should be a little bit lighter, and then as you build your painting up, you can add and remove color to make sure that the lighting is important. But that value part is, 100% one of the most important things. Value, by the way, is always more important than color, 100% in a painting. If you don't believe me, just look at Monet, right? Monet's paintings, there's purple in the trees, there's purple in the sky, there's red in the grass. And so the color doesn't really matter, but as long as the values are right, then your eye kind of gets it and makes sense, and things feel like they're in the right light. This is a painting. This is an important painting for me because for years before I even did my Coots series, for years I was doing very high realism kind of stuff. I would use a little tiny brush and I would use photographs and I would copy the photograph exactly the way as I saw it. The problem is that for me anyway, and this is not always that way for artists, but for me, I found it to be almost grueling after a while. Sometimes I would take months. This painting took me literally months to do with a little brush, looking at a little photograph, and it kind of sucked the joy a little bit out of painting. And it really started to wear on me a bit, and I thought there's got to be sort of a better way to do this. And some people spend their whole career doing this, and that's totally fine, but for me, I just needed to kind of break out of it a bit. And so it kind of, as I moved through trying to figure that out, this painting here specifically was one of the first paintings I did that weren't with a little tiny brush, and I was actually over at Coots Paradise one day, and I saw this scene, and I thought, I was kind of frustrated because I didn't want to start another big painting, with a little tiny brush and spend 3 months on it. At that time, I was really trying to find another way to be a little bit more freer, a little more expressive with my work, and be able to paint a little bit faster too, right? Like to create paintings in a week or even a day. So I ran home after I saw this. I painted it in 3 hours, really, really fast. And the feeling I got after I finished painting it, I felt almost kind of relieved, like I had got something out. It was really expressive, and I just love that feeling. And I love the feeling I just completed something in 3 hours. I had made my sort of thought onto the canvas, and I was done. And I really felt, it kind of really freed me up. So that's what sort of started my whole Coots series, which I'll show you here. So again, I'll just show you this. The reason I put this down here is because I use gold and acrylic paint for the most part. That's kind of my go-to. I also use a gel medium. Does anybody know what that is, like gel medium? Okay. I use it a lot with my paint to thicken the paint up, and it increases the volume of the paint too as well. It's something that I started doing when I did this painting because I found I was using a lot of paint, a ton of paint. And I needed to find a way to still use a lot of paint in this sort of impasto style. And so I found this gel medium and I started mixing it with my paint. And I came up with some different ways to do it. Because if you mix too much gel medium with your colors, it starts to change the color a little bit. It gets a little bit difficult to work with. But I found some different ways to do it. Like I was able to do really thick impasto style and save a little bit of money on paint too as well. So I use a limited color palette too, by the way. And the reason I use a limited color palette is it really sort of just harmonizes your colors and your values. So what do I mean by a limited palette? I use only about 2 colors of each, like 2 yellows, 2 blues, 2 browns. I don't use green. I mix my greens with blues and yellows. And the reason I do it, again, like I said, is by limiting your color palette, it tends to unify your colors in general. If you have a huge color palette, for example, filled with 4 greens, 4 blues, 4 yellow, right? What can happen is if you're not careful about how you use those colors on the canvas, you end up with every color in the rainbow on your canvas, and it gets really busy and ununified. And so by limiting your color palette, you only work with a certain set of colors, and it unifies the painting, and it's a little bit easier to look at, less busy. I don't use black. A lot of artists don't use black. Again, like I said, I don't use green. Any question on this, by the way? Yeah, go ahead.
Use heavy body or open?
Heavy body, yeah. I've never tried the open. I've thought about using the open, but the problem with the open is it only comes in the little tubes. It doesn't come in any other, it doesn't come in a larger format. It's funny, I don't know why it doesn't, because it would be fantastic if it was just a larger format. I'd have to buy tons of these little tubes. Go ahead, yeah.
So when you have to paint a painting finished, do you also coat your painting with?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I use a lacquer on top of it. I feel like that's traditionally that's a really important part of the painting process. When you're done using some type of medium that goes on top of it to protect your painting, there's a lot of ones that you can use. I use a satin finish on my. It's a Liquitex product. It's called Satin, and I use that on top when I'm done. And it dries completely clear. It adds a slight gloss to the painting, but not super glossy, where it's when you look at it, it's hard to look at kind of thing. It's just a nice little sheen, and it kind of gives it a nice finish. And the nice part about it is it keeps the light fastness in your painting. What that means is, obviously, if you had this painting in a window, like with bright sunlight on it for a long period of time, the colors would fade, even with golden products. So something like adding an additive or something like that on top to protect it keeps the color into your work. And also, if some kid spilled something on it, you can wipe it off, right? So again, so I know we're a little hair over time. Is everybody okay with that? Okay. So this is that Coots series. This is one of the first paintings after that last one I just showed you. After this one, there's another one I did. So I was walking through Coots Paradise, and I was looking for ways to find compositions that were really quick, that I could do very, very fast, very expressively. I was muting my color palette down to just a few browns and grays because I wanted that moody tone. And I walked by this log one day, and it looked like a serpent. I call this painting Serpentine. And it looks like a little bit of a serpent with a tongue sticking out. And so that's literally the kind of thing that not everybody thinks like that, but that's kind of what I was thinking of when I saw it. And that's kind of what was sort of the meaning behind the painting. But again, it was really thick. And it's interesting because when I started doing this series, my wife said to me, she said, why are you doing all these bland sort of, paintings with really desaturated color? And nobody's going to want that, right? But as she knows me, I always like to paint for myself. I don't tend not to care anyway. But I did it anyway. And the interesting part is it ended up in a show and it ended up being the first thing that sold. I was like, ha, I told you. Right? She thinks only flowers sell, so. And if I thought that way, I'd never be creative and do the stuff that I do, right? Go ahead.
Have you ever done a painting you couldn't part with like this?
Oh man, if you ask my wife that, if I hang it up, it never goes out of the house. But anyway, I don't know. It's a hard question. I think I can get rid of any of them, to be honest with you. I think I've gotten to that point that when I'm done, I paint for myself. I'm sad to see them go a little bit, but I know that they're going to go into somebody's home, and usually people who buy them are really ecstatic about buying them, and it's going to fit into, it becomes a showpiece in their place, and that makes me pretty happy, and so I'm good with that. Yeah, I'm at peace with it.
Are these generally that you're showing and they generally
So,
size?
yeah, it's fun. So yeah, actually, this one's only a 24 by 24. It's a little bit smaller. I like, especially as I've gotten more along in the tooth with this stuff, I tend to work a little bit, I love working bigger. It's like my
But this is
favorite.
the biggest.
I've done maybe a little bit bigger than that, but yeah. But yeah, generally this size is kind of, the 30 by 40, I love working on that size. It's like my favorite. It's like kind of it's a large to medium size, so. And so, like I was saying with the Coots stuff, you can sort of see the paint is really super thick on there. And I was using the gel medium. I don't know, is it hard? Can you guys see that? It's really, really thick paint. I was really sort of gobbing it on. Again, I was fascinated at that time with Coots. Coots has like a really, depending on the time of year you go, Coots is a strange place. I'm not knocking Coots Paradise, but it is a strange place because I always see it as almost a mysterious place. It coincides, it lives within the city, right? And it always feels like this sort of place of death and rebirth, to me anyway. And I found it very mysterious. And you walk in there in the fall, and there's no leaves on the trees, and it feels a little desolate. But then you see life. You see, a swan sort of going by, and I think that's kind of what I was thinking of when I did this piece. And there's so many dead leaves and that kind of stuff. And then I wanted to make the water sort of bluey green, so to really contrast with those things. Again, you can sort of see, that's Princess Point. You can see how thick the paint is. That's literally how thick the paint is really, really thick. As I've done my urban landscape stuff, these are actually some experimental work that I'm working for. I'm working on a show for Girls Court in September, and the paint's a little bit thicker, as you can tell. A little bit thinner than some of my earlier stuff. Saw Coots Paradise. Again, really sort of thick impasto style stuff. Again, much moodier. Usually, like now, if I do sunlight, it's much more yellow and more orange. Back then, it was more red and more brown, the sunlight. I was fascinated by, this is one of the trees at Coots. I was fascinated by these trees. They almost look like they're deformed in some way. And you guys have seen that one. And then after I did Coots, I actually started doing a few more paintings after that, which had a little more color in them. This is one of them. This is Coots Paradise again. This was actually an oil. And so I was experimenting with oil at that time too as well. It was still very, very thick, but I was adding more color into the work. And it's funny, I didn't really mean for that to happen. It just started happening. And so I found that really interesting. Maybe it was just something in myself that needed to have more color. I do like more color in my work now. This is actually, when I was talking about that City Garden series, when I was taking that walk that night, this is another scene from that night. I was just walking around. The sun was just shining through the trees. I thought it was fantastic. I love the way sun shines off vehicles. Like the way it sort of sparkles off of vehicles. Love it. And then again, I love sort of bright, beautiful, bright colors against mundane colors. The contrast is very, very stark. And so I usually try to play with that a little bit go ahead. Yeah, Christine.
How do you find the difference between baking the acrylics and oil?
Obviously they're both difficult to work with. The nice part about oils is, you can paint thick and you don't have to worry about leaving. You can just leave it and come back later and then and then you get this beautiful blending. That was actually one of the most difficult parts of my coot stuff, was that because the acrylic stuff dries so fast. I was even using a retarder to stop the drying, because I wanted that oily feel where you brush your paint through a nice big thick area, and you get that kind of blended thing. So I had to paint super ridiculously fast, and I would have to do it. I'd have to really plan out how I was doing it. I'd have to do a sky, and then I would have to do the trees right afterwards really quickly, and then overlap them a little bit so that I got the blending. I found that it was really difficult to do. And then I was starting to use oils, because I thought, okay, why am I killing myself like this? I'll start using oils, and then I can kind of go back in. The only problem with oils is smells like so bad. And it's actually for me, it's much more of a process. They're definitely more toxic. I don't like the fact that they're toxic. And it's not so much the paints, and obviously some of the paints, the pigments are a little toxic. That's not so much the problem. It's the fact that you get them on your hands and the oil goes into your skin with the pigment. That's not so good. And that's just the smell, actually. I found I was getting like a sore throat all the time, and so I went right back to my acrylics and was beating my head against the wall with acrylics again. So another acrylic painting. Again, this painting actually, like I said, sort of sits around in my studio, and it kind of informs. Sometimes I'll see this painting and be like, I wish I could do something with that, but I don't. I never do anything with it. But it kind of, again, it informed the colors on this. You can see how the colors sort of informed it, eh? You can see these muted sort of pinks and oranges. I actually was trying to kind of get that same feeling in those flowers. And then as I started moving into more urban landscape stuff, the colors become much more brighter. I was getting a lot more bolder with my colors. I was still pretty thick with it, but I was really getting fascinated. I was walking down Head Street one day. If you walk down Head Street in Hamilton, there's lots of different streets, but there's one street in Hamilton, I was walking down and the sun was going down and it looked like a yellow curtain coming down. Now, interestingly enough about Hamilton is something about the science in it, something about the particles in the air, but the sunsets are really beautiful in Hamilton because of this scientific particle stuff in the air. Anyway, it was a yellow curtain. I ran home. I kind of painted the yellow first. I didn't have a reference for it actually at all. I just kind of went home and I kind of painted it from my memory. And then I actually had some photographs of this and I painted it on top. And then I kind of tried to mimic that sun kind of coming off of the cars. Any questions? Somebody? Okay. And then again, sort of just these evening walks that I take a lot. This is part of the kitchen garden. I was fascinated by bell jars for a little while when I went to the Dungeon Kitchen. I actually didn't know much. I didn't know anything about bell jars. I was like, what are all these bells on the ground? And I actually they explained to me what they are and why they're important. But I thought they were such an amazing compositional element. Anyway, so I wanted to paint those. And I created this kind of screen along the front of the flowers. And again, so my urban stuff is really kind of what sort of overtakes most of my work right now. I will say though, this painting, when you were talking about values, this painting was mostly done all down here in just a grayish purple, the whole thing, but with different values of gray purple. And then the sky, if you can sort of see in behind, it's kind of got this pink color. I actually painted a pink underneath. And then what I did is I overlaid my blue and my green and my yellow on top of that and let some of the pink shine through so that it kind of there was a real contrast between that. And I do stuff like this. So sometimes I'll walk down at night and I'll be walking by a restaurant. This is actually Hess Street. Everybody knows the King George. It's a restaurant down there, a bar down there. But the back of it has the back alley has this weird little sign that says the entrance out front. And I just thought this was really interesting with the different lights. So I wanted to kind of get that glow of the light coming out of the window. This is a recent painting. I do a lot of these paintings, by the way, of light coming through buildings, shining on the street. I love this, especially in the morning. If you get up in the morning, go for these walks and you see the sunlight coming through the buildings and the trees and everything. I find it so calming and so peaceful. Occasionally I'll do paintings. This is a really big painting, by the way. It's a 48 by 48, I think. And does anybody recognize this place? It's the Westtown, yeah. Lots. So actually, when I was doing this, I was actually thinking of. Does anybody know who Rothko? Mark Rothko is a famous. So his paintings had kind of these bars, and there was one with orange and green, and it's kind of I always love the color combination of because red and green in general anyway are really attractive to your eye, and so I was kind of thinking of that abstract concept when I was doing this, the red and the green, and then the fluorescent lights, almost like candy against all these kind of muted greens. So I embellished all of that. Actually the building itself is not green, it's kind of a gray color, but because Rothko had that green, I just made it green, and it actually kind of worked out. And that's what I was saying when you're using photographs. Use photographs away. I think it's really, really, really important to use photographs, but make sure that you use it as a reference point, and that you're putting yourself into the painting, right? Find a way to interact with the photograph that says, this is me, as opposed to just saying, this is just a photograph and just painting the photograph. And this, again, I paint stuff like this, night scenes. I find this kind of stuff, I love the abstract concept of this stuff. With all the different signs. It's almost like abstract shapes everywhere. That one particularly, this is a new one that I did. And I loved all of the different shapes, the triangles, the colors, all the different lights. It's almost like a big, busy abstract. That's kind of what I was thinking of when I was painting it.
I think it's really interesting how the closest signs and things are almost out of focus.
Out of focus a little bit? Yeah, I was trying to mute them. So the thing about that was, when I did them, they were a lot more clear, but the problem is especially this sign here, and it could be also the light too a little bit, but I found that this sign was really sticking out. So I actually muted all of these colors. I actually went back over and muted them because I wanted you to see them, but I didn't want I didn't want them to be the focal point of everything. So I made them quite a bit darker. I actually toned everything down from a darker standpoint. And what I was really more interested in was the cars, these cars kind of going up the street, this over here. I was interested in these green lights and all of this sort of green light going down the street. And then I actually added this in. I wasn't there, but I had to kind of add it in because you can't tell. It was, right? I guess between us, artistically, right? It wasn't there. I added it because if I didn't add it in there, this area would have kind of deadened up, and it would have been a little bit imbalanced. And by adding that there now, your eye kind of gets put over there. It goes back over, and then has a place to stay. Yeah, so that's all I got. Is there any questions? Anybody have any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
You're saying you just added the white van.
Yeah.
How did you decide to do that? Did you have a piece of white paper and you can move it around? Or?
No. So I had a picture of that, of this sort of, and the light and the way it looks and all that kind of stuff. And then I just painted it on top. Yeah, just literally just painted it on top. What I did though first, I know what you're saying. I did it very lightly in kind of like a very dark blue, so that if I had to, I could just quickly color over it, right? And then I kind of built it up. So, and I, trying to see if that worked, but it worked out. So, yeah.
So if the light would have been red, would you have made the walk sign, don't walk?
It's a good question. We should converse after this, and you can help me out with some of this stuff. That's good. It's really good. Any other questions, folks?
Can you go back one slide?
Yeah.
Yeah, slide.
Yeah, so this one, can you guys really see it? It's on my screen, it's a little bit different, but yeah, I guess you can see it there. But I was really fascinated by all the different colors of the lights and stuff. I find night paintings, actually recently I've been doing, this is again, a night painting. I've been finding that really interesting. So I'll take walks at night and kind of take tons of shots and see what I can come up with. I find because of the different signs and lights, it's really easy to make interesting abstract compositions. They're also very, very challenging though, because you got to be careful that it's not too busy, right? Like I said with that one, it was getting super busy. All of this stuff up here was like really standing out. So my eye was like, whoa, like all over the place. And so I muted this all down. And so now most of the focal point is here going up. You kind of see this and you bounce back and forth most of the point. And then you kind of look around, but it's not as much of a focal point. So it kind of, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, just wondering, so I mean, there's obviously in these two images, there's a lot of different details and exact lines that you have to pay attention to and be true to. And so I'm assuming at some level you're sketching those out either with pencil or with paint. And then how much do you go, and how much do you go, you have to kind of paint a background and then kind of wait and then layer on top of that and then wait. And then by that point, of course, you've covered up the things you've drawn,
The lines.
sketched out. And
Yeah.
I'm just curious about that process.
Yeah, I know what you mean. So what I usually start to do, what I do is once I'm finished the drawing, I actually go back over with a super dark line, like I'm talking Prussian blue and burnt umber, right? Because that's how I get my black. I don't use black, so I use those two colors to kind of, you mix those two colors, you get a really dark sort of dark brownish gray kind of color. And it's really dark, so I actually outline everything with a paintbrush with that dark color, and I go all around all my pencil lines with that dark line. And then what I do is, so you were talking about the underpainting, I actually do the underpainting on top of those dark lines. I do it in almost, that underpainting is almost kind of a watercolory kind of consistency. I add a ton of water to the acrylic, and it becomes like watercolor. And so I create this kind of watercolory kind of value study underneath, and I can still see my black lines through that. And then I slowly start building up after that. Eventually, though, you get to a point, and I know what you're saying, what happens when you come to something that's not drawn anymore. I think you just have to draw it on. That's what I end up doing. Like something like this, for example, I drew it in at the end, right? And then the nice part about acrylic is you draw it in. If it doesn't work, you just paint over it. Now with oils, by the way, you can actually scrape it off, which is even cooler. But if it doesn't work out, you can. The other thing too is if it's wet enough, you can wipe it off too. Sometimes I do that. I'll draw it in, and I'll be like, "Well, that's not right," and I'll wipe it off really quickly before I had a chance to dry. Yeah, go ahead.
You probably have a million different techniques for blending, but can you kind of talk about how you blend is came through that kind of novice struggling with the blending part, dry so fast?
When you say the blending, you're talking about like if it's,
Talk about that street light maybe, that traffic light.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. So it's a building process with that. And I'm just thinking back now how I do it. But it's sort of a building process of, I won't put this white light in. So see that white dot in the middle? I won't put that in at first. I'll wait till later. The reason is because I want the impact. I want to see what the impact is. But I'll start with the yellow. I'll probably paint all of this reddish color around it first, so I have something to paint the yellow on top of. And then I start to blend. So from that yellow, with something like that yellow turns into red as it comes out, right? Into the reddish colors here. So I'll start adding more red to my yellow, and I'll start working around, and I'll add more red to that yellow, and I'll just keep working around and kind of blending it out that way.
Do you add a lot of gel medium?
So this one particular, I didn't use a lot of gel medium on this one. I used a little bit because it's not super thick. So for these ones, and actually both of these, maybe not, I actually used quite a bit of gel medium on that one. This one I didn't use a lot of gel medium. And so maybe this will help. So for example, this here, right? I didn't put that white part in first. I actually had all of this blue sort of I had all this blue sort of painted in right up to about here. Does that make sense? And then what I did is I started adding the yellow. I added more red. I actually added a little bit of pink to it. And I started literally just adding it on top of the actual blue and then started blending it out that way. The other thing too was with this, if you notice here, it's really, really thin. So I'm actually almost kind of dry brushing it. At a certain point, I'm actually almost dry brushing it on so that you can see it kind of blend in. The other thing too is, if you actually came up really close to it, there's a definite line. You can see where my red is, where it meets the blue, right? I'm not super concerned with that because the values are pretty much right. Do you know what I mean? Like I'm not too worried if that's not blended 100%. I don't really care. As long as, for the most part, when I stand back, it looks right. And maybe I need to adjust it a little bit. The whole painting is done like that, right? So from a harmony standpoint, your eye kind of gets it because other parts of the painting are like that. They're kind of loose and does that make any sense? Yeah, okay. Go ahead, guys. Sorry, go ahead.
Hi. So this one that's on screen,
Yep.
it almost looks like it's wispy. Is that just because it's on the screen? Is it, I mean, the other ones look like it's evening shot.
It's funny. I don't know if I can turn it around, but you can sort of see it's actually not that misty. See the difference? There's a huge difference there. Yeah, I know. See, it's a way different. So actually, it is a little bit. There's a lot of light up in here. It does get a little misty, but no, there's no mist in the painting. It's just that's what you're looking at up on there. Yeah. Is that okay? Everybody can see that? You guys, by the way, can come up here at the end and just scroll through it if you want to see the images for sure. Keir, this slide deck will be available for people after, or how does that work? Okay. Oh, perfect. Awesome. It's cool. Yeah, go ahead.
What would you say, when you're looking at art, would you say the size of your art? I know the size may alter your answer.
Yeah.
Would you say always stand back, 314? Don't get your nose on top of it, or what would you say?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely want to get back. I mean, I don't know. I've never really thought about the actual distance, but you definitely want to get back so you can sort of see it as a whole, right? When you're painting, you want to make sure that you're painting as a whole. And what I mean by that is, quite often you see artists, they'll do like just one little section, right? And they'll do another section and then do another section, right? It's super important, at least if you're gonna do that, make sure you have an underpainting, okay? Because if you don't have the underpainting, what's gonna happen is you're gonna do this all in beautiful detail, right? And then you're gonna come over here, and then you'll realize that this has to be much darker because the light is different over here, right? So when I say work the whole painting as a whole, you gotta kind of you gotta bounce around all over the place, build up the whole thing slowly so that everything feels like it has the same lighting, if that makes any sense. So, okay. Christina?
You said you muted the colors. How did you do that?
So I literally took the colors that I had, so I mixed new colors and painted on top. Yeah, I literally painted on top. I darkened up the colors, painted it on top. And in some cases, I actually kind of just brushed color. So you can see on this one, see how it's red in behind it? There's kind of a red. I actually took a darker kind of reddish blue and I added it on top. And then I used my thumb a little bit every once in a while to kind of do that. So you could see the red a little bit behind it, but it's still muted it enough. You know, and just kind of work a little bit of paint on top and keep muting it. Use my thumb till it's right where I want it to be. Hopefully that answers that question. Yeah.
Have you ever taken a painting, for instance, a painting like this or this, where you painted it a second or a third time with maybe a different palette, or you gelted something, or you played around with painting something multiple times?
Essentially, well, I don't think so, because I think in general, it's funny, if I do something, like when I did this, I have no desire to do this ever again. To do this scene. Although I'm doing some stuff right now where I'm kind of, I'm using a lot of the same area. But no, I generally, when I'm finished a painting, I feel like I've said everything I needed to say about it. And I feel like doing it again would make another statement. It would be a totally new, I'd probably feel different things about it at that point, or maybe I thought different things at that point, so it'd be just like a different statement. And I feel like, I just feel like I'd like to, as I said, remember I said at the beginning, there's a pattern tends to happen for me. I'm always looking for the next best thing in my mind. Maybe it's not the best way to look at it, but I'm always trying to get better. It's like this kind of journey I'm trying to move through, and I'm looking for a new experience to live through with paint. So doing it again, it's yeah. I've had people actually though ask me, "Can you redo this painting?" And I said, "No." I can't do it. I can't do it. Because then I'd be worried too, is it going to be good? Is it going to be as good as the last one? That'd be another, that'd be a thing.
Is there a specific camera you prefer for your photos?
Nothing I prefer. So I'll tell you right now, I'm not a photography buff. I have a Nikon 3D100, I think it was, or something like that. I don't really know too much about it. So, and that's why I sort of said in the beginning that using the photograph is literally just a reference point for the thought process. I really don't know. I know enough about cameras that I can take a shot at night, and I know how to do that with the aperture and all that kind of stuff. But honestly, sometimes I'll take photographs. I wish I had done this actually. There's been some times where I've taken a really dark, ugly photograph and then done something different with it. And it turned out fantastic because the initial thought was, for example, there was one I did a couple years ago. It was an evening shot, and I took a shot of it, and it's just like this gray-blue city underneath, and there's a beautiful sky on the top of it, but the photograph is it was a horrible photograph. It wasn't done very well, but I didn't care because I knew what I experienced in that moment, and then I started laying down this kind of a bluish color because at night the shadows tend to be a little more bluer, especially when the sun's going down, and so I added just a nice deep blue. And that deep blue actually sort of made the painting. And if you look at the painting and the photograph, it's like it's just not even, it's not the same thing. And that's why I always really, really stress that use photographs 100%, but use them only as just an idea or a where things are, if you can reference point where things are and that kind of stuff. But make sure you bring yourself to the painting. Quite often, what I'll do in my sketchbook, I'll do little sketches like this. So I'll take a photograph and I'll do this little kind of watercolory sketch in acrylic, and I'll do it in completely different colors, just colors that I like. And then sometimes that gets the creative juices going, and that really sort of informs your painting. The photograph for this is, again, a completely different photograph. It's really gray. I think there's a lot of green in it too, and that makes sense at night. But I didn't want the green, I wanted the purpley kind of. Actually, I did all of this, and even in the cars, I did it in a purpley blue, in different values of purple blue. So the whole thing underneath is a value study. You might even be able to see some of it underneath. Actually, you can see it there. It's kind of a purpley blue. I really wanted a feeling of purple, so I actually made that underpainting, everything. I did everything in sort of a purpley blue, and then built it up after that with the different values and different colors on top of that. So.
Rona wants to know where that is.
This here? Yeah, that's.
I think you made up the lines on the street, right? Those aren't.
No, they're there. Yeah, they're there.
Like
Do you know where it is though?
No.
It's it's Main and Lock.
See, yeah, you're prowling my neighborhood.
Yeah. Oh, is it? You're there? Okay. I do love. I like that area. I should venture outside the rest of the city, but anyway, I love the evening. I just like walking around taking photographs, so it makes sense. Yeah.
So when you're doing plein air and you bring it back to the studio, is it finished or you're working on it or?
Sometimes
Just
it's,
an idea, like a photo?
I think is all of the above. Sometimes I've done like, I've done something and I think it's like half finished, and then I'll take it home. So sometimes I'll do something in plein air and don't finish the whole thing. I'll just do, only part of it is finished, and then I'll take it home and finish it in the studio and do that kind of thing. Sometimes I use it as, I use it to inform a larger piece. For example, I remember I went down to, Sauble Beach, I think, and I stood outside in the snow, and I was painting on plein air. I was painting these ice jams inside the dock, and it was freezing, so I had to just basically get something down. But then I went home and I used that as kind of the inspiration, because it's all kind of blue and gray, and I love the colors, and I love the inspiration of that, and it kind of helped me remember. And then when I came back, I used a ton of photographs to recreate it, but I put that other sketch right beside me to remind me of what I was really seeing and what I was really feeling at the time. So, yeah, I think that's important. Yeah.
How much time does this take you approximately? Like,
So stuff like this takes a lot longer. This took about a week and a half to complete. That one took roughly about the same time. Stuff like, So stuff like this takes about 3 days. It's a little bit smaller. It's a 24 by 24. This was a little one, so it took me like, I think it took me like 3 hours. This one took me about I think I did it in 2 evenings. I think it was like 2-3 hour time frames. This I did in one shot in about 5 hours in the studio. But again, so it really depends on so this one's done very, very thick paint. It's very, very loose. I'm not worried about a lot of detail, even though there's some detail there. And it looks more detailed because it's in a smaller thing. But when you're looking at some more of these this stuff here, all the cityscape stuff tends to take a lot longer. Even though I'm trying to be really loose with it, it's difficult because you're still having to do all the little wheels and all that kind of stuff. It takes a lot longer, for sure.
Do you work by more than one painting at the same time?
No. It's funny, a lot of artists do that. I don't know how you can do it, because when I start getting into a painting, I'm in it. And I can't think of putting it aside and trying another one. Like I'm right into this painting, and sometimes especially when you get to about 3/4 of the way, or at least halfway of the painting, and it's crap in your head, it's garbage, because that usually always happens. Halfway through, it's garbage. Just the way it is, it's garbage. But then you get to that 3/4 mark, and you're like, okay, it's not bad. There's no way I'm putting that down and starting a new one. I have to see where it's going to go. So, yeah.
Do you ever sell prints or only?
Just originals, yeah. Prints is something I did a long time ago. I did do that, and I remember I used to make prints of my work, and I used to go around to all these different fairs and stuff like that to sell them. And then, I started selling my originals, and I just like doing that better. I actually, to be honest with you, now it's I don't make prints, because when somebody buys a painting, it's theirs. Nobody else has a copy of it. It's a one of a kind. I love that idea. I just love that. And so that's why I never copy it. I never put it into print or anything like that. So. All right. Anybody other questions, guys? Anyway, thank you so much, everybody, for coming out. It was fantastic to meet all of you. Thank you. Thank you.